So I'd like to welcome Chantal Shedden to come and speak to you all.
I'm not saying need you.
For those of you who don't know who I am, I was one of the parliamentary candidates in December election just gone. And before I go into anything else, I would like to say a massive thank you to Eve and her colleagues that have pulled all of us together today. So can we just have a clap for Eve, I also want to say thank you to every single one of you who stood here today, and thank you so much for observing social distancing. As this pandemic has gone across the globe, it has reminded us in the most tragic way that we are one people, and it is only by helping each other that we will ever achieve a better future. And that's why we're stood here today. Standing here might feel like a small act, but actually it's one of the most important things that you can do. By standing here today, you are declaring that you know that there is a problem and that you are committing yourself to seeing changes made. As Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel said, we must take sides. Neutrality only helps the oppressors, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentors, never the tormented. So I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for rejecting neutrality. Prejudice still exists, period. Some of you are here because you have been victims of prejudice. Some of you because you feel compelled to defend its victims. And some of you are stood here because you've witnessed prejudice. And maybe some of you have reflected and maybe feel a little bit uneasy about how you reacted in that situation. All of you have a valuable part to play in this struggle. My personal experiences of prejudice is very different to many other ethnic minorities. My ethnic origin is not immediately obvious to most people. I'm actually of white, Chinese and black African heritage, but I appear white to most people. My unique circumstances mean that I've been able to peek behind the curtain. I see how people talk when they don't think there's an ethnic minority in the room. I've been stood in conversations that have been politically correct, and then suddenly the tone changes because they don't think there's a minority around, completely unaware that I am one. As a child, I wasn't bullied in school until my dad, who was black, showed up to a sports day. And then shortly afterwards, I started getting followed home by a group of girls singing Clitheroe at the top of their lungs to the tune of Figaro. So, the reason I share my experiences is to remind you that we have to fight both overt racism and the racism that hides in the shadows, even when we are in social circles where that's difficult to do. We must speak with courage and stop it. The fight for equality has been long, and there has been some progress. Yet as a child, I heard about the difficulties that my grandparents faced in a mixed African and Chinese relationship. I heard of the discrimination that my dad, aunties and uncles suffered due to their mixed ethnicity. My brothers and I have our own experiences, and now I see that the next generation is fighting this battle too. Forgive me, this bit's hard for me to read. The world watched aghast as George Floyd exclaimed, "I can't breathe." And as he took his last breath, The world gasped in horror and then roared, "No more!" And that roar was heard around the globe and made it to this tiny corner of the UK where all of you people have listened. There have been so many more movements before Black Lives Matter, but the inspiration, the intensity and the energy of this one is inspiring. We owe it not only to past generations, but to future generations to eradicate prejudice now. History has shown us that the price of peace and justice is the eternal vigilance and commitment to those ideals. So we must learn this lesson. Tolerating differences of opinion is a critical element of a free society, and in many issues there's room for healthy debate. Racism is not one of them. It is wrong. Given this obvious fact, I find it deplorable that our government has not rejected neutrality, but instead embraced it, refusing to engage with this issue. The Ribble Valley is one of the warmest and most welcoming places I've ever been fortunate enough to call my home. So, as our elected representative, I now invite Mr. Evans to reject neutrality, to demonstrate the values that you have all shown here today, and to condemn the unacceptable actions and rhetoric of Prime Minister Johnson and President Donald Trump. It really is that simple. We just have to say enough. Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
In front of so many people. I also had the privilege to stand in the general election in December. It was an interesting experience, but also one that taught me about the positive parts of the Ribble Valley and the community that we live in. And it's great to see that community here today. And also I think we need to pass again our thanks on Eve in arranging this, putting herself above the parapet and causing for her real difficulties in the way that some people have reacted to this event being organised. But what I think Eve can take from this is the number of people here and the solidarity that they're showing with her, but more importantly, with the wider black community in Ribble Valley and beyond. My experience in dealing with racism is limited. I've been a police officer in the past and I've challenged unacceptable behaviour from colleagues. I'm a lawyer now, and I also see unacceptable behaviour by lawyers and by the criminal justice system. And when we talk about taking action, one of the things that ought to be put into place immediately is the recommendations of the Lammy report into the disproportionate way that black and minority ethnic communities are treated by the criminal justice system. The Lammy report was commissioned by David Cameron. It reported in 2017. Theresa May said that she would implement it, yet nothing has been done. And when people criticise and say we should not be here because of the pandemic, what we need to recognise is that that situation is ongoing and continuing, and it's only by pressure, by people like us, attending events like this, that will make the issue high up the political agenda and see change happen. One experience that I've dealt with and seen is of a white immigrant judge talking about a colleague of mine in Chambers who is Asian and saying, well, he's like one of us. That shows you the extent of prejudices that still remain in the criminal justice system. And those are the things that we need to deal with. And what I want to do is to read an excerpt from a post that was posted on social media by the wife of a barrister. It's been shared countless thousands of times, but it outlines the experience of a black man in Britain in the criminal justice system and the prejudice that he has faced. And so, if you allow me, I'll read that now. And it says this: I hear some of you say this is America's fight, and I beg to differ. We struggle with racism in the UK. Structural racism is ingrained in our society, and we have become so used to it that we don't even recognise it is there. We've just accepted it as the way things are, but do not know who is aware of it every day, our black brothers and sisters. My husband is not a fan of social media, so I don't mention him much in my posts to respect his wishes. But I ask for his permission to share a bit of his story with you to open your eyes up to some of what really goes on here in the UK. Leon is a barrister by day. His journey to the bar was a long and grueling one. It took him 12 years to finally become a tenant in his chambers. He studied law at uni and was told he was not good enough to be a barrister. He left and worked for a year round the clock to raise enough money to pay for his law school. You may or may not know that the bar is a very privileged white middle-class profession. After he qualified as a barrister, he worked for 5 years doing low-paid jobs to gain experience to get a foot in the legal door. He was ejected from many jobs and pupillage opportunities and watched as white counterparts with less experience and skill were offered those very same jobs. But he didn't give up. Eventually, he was finally offered a pupillage, an essential training process which you have to become a barrister, and worked around the clock to prove himself more than capable. People often assume that he is a defendant despite being in a suit, purely because he is a young black man, and this mistake is even made by other barristers. He has had to defend clients who are charged with racially aggravated assaults, and does so with grace, humility and integrity. Regardless of the offence, he does his best to represent all his clients to the best of his ability. He is 31 and has been stopped and searched 7 times and unlawfully arrested once. On all these occasions, there were no real grounds for stopping him, and his arrest was degrading. On the day of his arrest, it was Valentine's Day 2014. He was on his way to see me. In his bag, he had a personalised plaque made for me for Valentine's Day, with a hammer and nails to put it up for me. He was stopped by the police on the grounds that they believed he had a firearm. It was raining and cold. They twisted his arms and put him in handcuffs, pushed his face into a park railing. For 30 minutes he stood there whilst an armed officer pointed a gun at him. His nose was running because of the cold, and despite his requests, they wouldn't even let him wipe snot running down his face. This all happened near to his home, and his neighbours watched and walked past. He was utterly humiliated. On arrest, they searched him, and they didn't find a firearm, but did find a hammer. So they changed the reason for the arrest to suspected of robbery, as he fitted a description. He explained the hammer was to put a plaque up at his fiancee's, which was also in the bar. They found it. His mum and his brother passed by in the car and saw the commotion. His mum jumped out to find what was going on. He went to the police station. Eventually, he was released with no apology. Every single time he has been stopped and searched, sometimes in his suit and tie on his way to work, he has been singled out and people walk past him believing he is a criminal. Can you imagine the embarrassment? One time during a stop and search, the police officers allowed their dog to put his dirty paws all over his suit, and he arrived at work late with dog paw marks on it. These are just a few of the examples of some of the injustices he has faced, and he is just one black man who works to fight for justice. One man who has such a heart for compassion. One man who works harder than anyone I've ever known to provide for his family. One man who loves the Lord. One man seeking to break stereotypes. One man seeking to inspire other young people to believe they can be more than what the world says they can be. He has never taken drugs. He has never hurt anyone. He has never stolen. The list goes on. He is just one black man. That's his experience. That's why we're here. It's fantastic to see so many of you here. Please be the change that you want to see.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Firstly, I'd like to thank every single person standing here for joining me today. Something like this, in a town so wonderful and beautiful as yours, I cannot express what it means to me and the other people who feel like I do. So thank you. I'd like to thank our two speakers who outlined something that I think is crucial to understanding this debate. There are in this world two types of racism as defined by the American justice system. De facto racism. That is racism that is personal, committed by one individual to another, person to person. For example, when I walked through town the other day with my beautiful girlfriend, somebody drove by in a van, rolled their windows down, put their middle finger up at me, and called me a backie. That's bad, right? But we've heard things that are much worse than this. We know what happens in this world. That's why every single one of you are standing with me here today. There's a second type of racism, one that is misunderstood, one that is more crucial to this fight and this argument than what I experience being someone who has pigmentation in their skin. And that is what the American justice system defined as de jure. De jure racism is racism that is built into the system. Systematic racism. We get this phrase wrong all the time. Systematic racism is not personal racism that happens a lot of times. Systematic racism is something that the government put in place to make it okay to commit those acts. I ask you, in this time, people of color, or however we're defined now, are tired. We've been having these discussions for a long time. We've been talking about these things for a long time. And now we are very lucky because we have people who will stand with us in these arguments and these discussions. I find that when we talk to people who don't agree with what we're saying, they will say things like, you're creating the divide. By saying us and them, you're creating a distance between us. But I disagree. I think all we are doing is highlighting the distance. We are highlighting the negative space, the lack of experience and knowledge between two sides. And that's where I think each and every one of us can come through. It's not enough to see someone say the protests are wrong because of COVID and brand them a racist. That's not fair. Remember, these are people who are scared too. Their way of life is changing. Everything they've understood about everything that is right and wrong is being changed. They're allowed to be scared. So don't go into those conversations saying that you're racist or you have white privilege so you cannot understand. You can't have a conversation that way. You can't educate that way and you can't teach that way. Go in understanding that these are people. They're not necessarily, oh, some of them are racist. I've seen some of the posts, some of them are racist. But most of them aren't. Most of them just don't understand. One person, one book, one film. One person. There is a rapper named Akala, who is one of the most eloquent speakers I have come across in the entire search of the internet. That's a big statement. His wealth of knowledge is amazing. A-K-A-L-A. Akala. Look him up. The stuff he says is profound. One book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. His book explains exactly how the government and the law created racial segregation. Techniques that aren't too dissimilar to France, to here. Learn about them. One film, pick one. There are so many on Netflix. Take it easy, watch something on Disney Plus and then go back in. The job now is not to extend the divide. It's to bridge the gap. And we do that by coming from a place of understanding and patience. Nudge, teach, educate, understand. Let's unify as one people. Thank you.